What's going on, bros? Welcome back. Another trade recap. You know the drill. We're gonna go over the trade that I took today, the W that we ended up hitting. How much bread did we make? We ended up making $495.54 across 5 accounts. 495, 54 times 4, $1,982.16. That's the total for today. Dub skis. Let's work. Let's go ahead and get into the trade recap now. Anyways, coming into the charts this morning, right, we were trapped between two separate gaps. Those being two daily gaps, which is the highest time frame, obviously. So, right, we have this daily gap here that sent us lower into this daily gap, which now we are either going to continue higher off of or continue lower off of, right? So depending on what actually happens off of that, right, that's kind of how we're going to decide which way to go. And it's hard in situations like this because we are stranded between two really high time frame gaps, literally the highest time frame that I ever look at, right? So in that scenario, we're delivering off of this gap, we're delivering off this gap. Where do we want to go, right? So that's kind of hard. So sent to the Discord this morning, I said, hey guys, my bias is extremely neutral for the day. Right, I don't really know where we want to go. We're just gonna have to see what happens. But primarily, I am leaning bullish. I told her I'm leaning bullish just strictly because our most recent gap that we're delivering off of is this daily gap here, right? So we deliver off of gaps until we've reached our next objective, right? So we deliver off of this daily gap here towards our next objective. Well, in this scenario, where's our next objective? Realistically, this gap here, right? So now we're no longer delivering off of this gap because we have reached our objective, right? So that's kind of the way that you can think about it. That's the way that I personally think about it. So in my head, I'm still thinking, yes, we do have this daily gap here, but we've just expanded lower into our objective. So now I'm thinking, okay, we're probably going to use this gap to expand higher, right? And so that's kind of what I was thinking personally. But like I said, I was still neutral on the day, just kind of have to use conditions where we want to go to determine price and where price wants to actually go. So off of market open, what ended up happening? So my draws on liquidity ended up being this 4-hour gap right here, as well as this 4-hour gap right here, right? This primarily being my draw on liquidity because it lined up perfectly with London high. So obviously we have session liquidity and then a high time frame gap in there as well. I love targeting higher time frame gaps as my actual draw on liquidity rather than highs or lows, just because it's a lot more, what's it called, predictable, and it's a lot more probable that we're actually going to go towards those areas. Anyways, so off of market open, what ends up happening? Well, you can't really see, but we do have this hourly gap, and we end up coming up and tapping into this hourly gap, right, and then pushing back lower, right? Now, the reason that I did not like this and did not want to take this trade, there was a 3-minute inversion that looked really good. Could have taken this down towards these lows. Now, the reason that I did not like this trade, number one, we edged this high right here, right? So we just put in relatively equal highs. Boom, just like that, right? So now we have relatively equal highs at our stop loss. We also have a 4-hour unmitigated gap at our stop loss, as well as another 4-hour unmitigated gap, as well as session liquidity being London highs, and then obviously Asia highs higher, but that doesn't really matter that much. But with that being said, right, this is at our stop loss. These stacked lows right here, this low resistance liquidity is at our stop loss, right? So this is not necessarily something that I really want to take because we didn't sweep out any sort of high. We didn't mitigate these, highs, and now we're pushing down. For what reason though, right? We're not delivering off of anything other than this hourly gap at the time and this 15-minute gap at the time. But other than that, there's really nothing else, right? We didn't have any sort of sweep of a high or low, right? Nothing of that nature. We didn't actually even end up sweeping it out on ES either, right? If we put in an SMT there, then maybe there's something that I'm thinking, okay, well, there's a chance that we go back down. We swept it out on one of them. But with this low resistance liquidity being here, I did not want to take any sort of short until we took all of this out because this looks way too juicy to just be sitting here and not get taken out, right? Especially with London highs being right there as well as the 4-hour gap. Like this is the 4-hour gap lined up perfectly with that high as well, right? So in that sense, I am not wanting to take this trade, right? There's way too much liquidity up here for us to go towards. without actually without taking it out, right? So if we were to expand higher first, come up into this 4 hour, then yeah, I could look for shorts to come back down, right? But we did not end up doing that, ended up edging this, creating a ton of liquidity here, right? This high, this high, this high, this high, this high, this high, 4 hour gap, London high, right? A ton of liquidity generating back to the upside. So that's specifically why I took this trade. Now, this trade idea is based off of the fact that we swept out this low inside of this 15-minute gap, right? Now creating a protected low at this area for a continuation push back up, right? Now, at first we had an SMT here. Unfortunately, ended up taking that out. So we no longer had the SMT. However, I still really liked this trade based off of just a few things, right? Number one being the fact that our draw on liquidity is so strong here. We're delivering off of a daily gap, right? We've just swept out liquidity, delivery off of a 15-minute gap and put in a protected low. We have a ton of low resistance liquidity higher, a ton of unmitigated high time frame gaps higher, as well as session liquidity higher, being London and Asia highs, right? So that to me is saying, okay, we're definitely wanting to go higher. My draw on liquidity is over everything right now. And even though you can say, right, oh, we didn't sweep out this low right here. Well, technically we don't really need to. That would have been extra confluence for sure, but we don't necessarily need to, right? And you could have said that this wasn't a great trade, but draw on liquidity and narrative over everything. Your draw on liquidity and your narrative is going to tell you so much more than what some simple confluences on a screen can tell you, right? Everybody that says ICT doesn't work, ICT means nothing if you are not pairing it with a draw on liquidity or a narrative of where price wants to go, right? Your 15-minute gap with an IFVG and an SMT means absolutely nothing if you are not pairing it with the higher time frame, your draw on liquidity, and a narrative and a story of where price wants to go, right? So this trade could absolutely mean nothing if you don't have anything for us to draw towards, right? Our draw on liquidity is extremely clear. We have a ton of draws higher, 4-hour unmitigated gaps, plural, with session liquidity, right? And we just swept out a low, manipulated that low, put in a protected low, right? That story is perfect. That's the perfect story. Holy, bro, generational wealth incoming, bro. I missed out on, that's insane. Anyways, but like, you understand what I'm saying, right? We do not want to take trades that do not have a story behind where we want to go, right? So that's literally like the entire gist of all of trading. ICT does not work if you don't have a story behind where price wants to go. The reason that people say ICT doesn't work is because they are the ones that are just pattern trading IFVGs. They're the ones that don't actually see the bigger picture, that aren't looking at the entire full story of where price wants to go, right? So that being said, let's get into the actual trade. So we swept out that low, right, 15-minute intermediate low, and then put in, this protected low. Now we're just kind of looking for our entry. So for me, my entry was this 1-minute IFVG with crazy displacement. Normally, I probably would not take this because I think we had like this gap up here higher, and we also ended up creating a 5-minute. But I was so confident in this trade just purely based off the fact that we had crazy displacement back up higher, right? We just swept out these lows, right? This looks exactly like it's going to continue back up, right? And we actually edged our stop loss here and then ended up continuing back to the upside. But still, nonetheless, a very, very fire trade. Another trade you could have taken would have been this 5-minute inversion, which was essentially the same thing, just targeting London highs instead. Like this, stops below here or at the candle body, whatever you're fucking with, right? And that would have been essentially the exact same thing. But with that being said, I had confirmation, I had conviction, and my story of where price wanted to go played out, right? And so therefore, I was right in that sense of taking this trade, right? And if you didn't take this trade, that's not saying you're a bad trader, right? But I had high conviction in this, whatever, whatnot, blah, 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 blah. But anyways, that's the trade recap for today. Drop some sauce in there for you guys as well. Mechanically wise, this trade was, not great. All it was a sweep of liquidity with a 15-minute gap and a 1-minute inversion, right? That's really it. Like mechanical wise, like there's no SMT or anything, but ended up playing out because our draw was so strong, right? So normally I would give this trade like a B+, but since our draw and liquidity and our narrative was so strong, this was an A+ setup. But that being said, that's trade recap for today. I will catch you boys tomorrow if we take a trade. If not, you won't see me. But that being said, I'll catch y'all boys later. Peace out.